Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we do not have a book review, or we kind of do, but not the usual book reviews. It'll be something different. I guess it will be more of a talk, my thoughts, opinions, theories, all of that regarding Lord of the Mysteries Volume 1. I know I've had some content recently about Lord of the Mysteries, but because I want to talk about this while my memory is fresh, and since I'm reading Volume 2, I fear that some of my memories and from reading Volume 2 will start getting mixed, so I just want to get this out of the way before I start spoiling stuff from Volume 2 that shouldn't be. So yeah, this will be a very spoilery talk about Volume 1. So if you haven't read it and want to read it, don't watch this video. Go watch my actual review. You can check it out on the thumbnails here or the cards. You'll get the standard reviews that I do here with all the categories and what I think of each one. But otherwise, you can stick around and hear me ramble a lot about this volume. Lord of the Mysteries, for the ones that don't know, is a fantasy web novel, and initially it is kind of like an isekai, which for the ones that don't know is when a character is transported from our world, usually into a fantasy world or a fantastical world, let's say, that is different or parallel to ours. And I know that people have commented that this might not be an isekai and etc., but I do consider that at the start, it does start like an isekai. It may not become an isekai in its fully content. However, the start it is quite similar. And I agree that later it kind of transforms or transmigrates into something different. I'm not going to describe in detail what the story is about because again, I've had the other review and otherwise this video would get way too long, but I will mention parts of the story here and there. But one of the things, if you want to know what this book is about in like one sentence, I saw this review on Goodreads and I found it funny and I'm gonna read it to you. And basically this book is about a budgeting icon who goes from feeding his family with half a slice of bread to beef stews every day while role-playing as God as a sidekick. And funny enough, this is kind of like in a nutshell what it is about, and it's funny that it sounds so completely bizarre, but it also represents Volume 1 a bit well. But so what are my actual thoughts on Volume 1? Well, it started off very confusing, as I mentioned in the actual review, because you are thrown into this world to become Klein, who is Joe transmigrated into Klein. And I admit I had a lot, but like a lot of troubles with the start of this web novel. Partially because of the writing itself, and here I'm not sure if the fault is of the translation or if the fault is really of the author, because he was starting this work, so he might not have been as experienced with writing. And if I compared his writing at the start with at the end, I can definitely see an improvement. So the start was just a bit rocky, partially because of the writing. But of course, the other part was due to the extreme exposure to all of the elements in this world. You're being exposed to the location where the story happens, the time as it happens, the world building, which there is a lot and I will dig into it further, but also like the characters, the initial plot. It's like everything is a big explosion of information. However, after reading some comments and now looking back as well, I can definitely see how this is kind of like we're seeing it from the perspective of Joe, who just transmigrated into Klein's body, and so he's suddenly being bombarded with all the memories from Klein, as well as trying to understand what is happening around him. So I can understand that that is the sense that the author wanted us to feel. However, I think it could have been done a bit better, so it's not so overwhelming for the reader in terms of information. It could have been distilled a bit more, but I can also understand now that maybe when I first read it, I was being a bit too harsh. Now, not long after this initial bombardment of information, we go into the fog realm, which again left me confused because then I was like, what is this? Is this part of the world? Is this something just for Klein / Joe? What is happening here? But either way, it left me confused, but at the same time, it left me intrigued. And I think if something leaves me intrigued, that's halfway for me to enjoy it. Because I mean, give me mysteries that I cannot solve right away, and I will be digging into the book to try and find out the answer. And then we have the details of having this huge table with a lot of different seats, and immediately we get the perception that those seats will eventually get filled with different people. And for some reason, the collectible hoarding animal in me was immediately like its interest was piqued, and I was like, oh, okay, I want to know who is going where and what powers it will have, because I assumed immediately that if Klein was there and he had powers, then surely the other people would also have powers. And this is also the part where we get introduced to two characters. There are Alger and Audrey, and initially I liked Alger a lot, like the character itself, the mysteries around him. And Audrey, I thought it was very stereotypical. I thought it was just the girl from the nobility that doesn't know much about anything in the world, really, is kind of spoiled. And this was just first impressions, because as I read more and where I'm at, my opinion has completely flipped, and I enjoy Audrey a lot more than I enjoy Alger, partially because she shows up a lot more than him. But still, I think the characters have improved a lot since then. But another thing that we get when we go into this fog realm where these two characters are introduced is that it seems that each seat will be associated with a potion or a sequence of powers that I'll explain soon what it is. But then it also means that those seats will all be filled with different powers. That's my theory. And each person decides on a name based on tarot cards. So, for example, we have Klein being the Fool, and then we have Alger being the Hanged Man, so on and so forth. And I think this is where one of my theories comes in, because I think that the tarot cards are some way, some clue about the pathways themselves, and or basically the author got some influence from tarot cards to create the sequences that exist. And I might be completely wrong, and please tell me if I am, but don't spoil anything. But that's one of my theories. I am still very early in the volume 2, so there's one extra character, or kind of two extra characters where I'm at, where they are in the tarot club. So not much information yet, but I'm very keen to see what's going to happen. And this tarot club introduces us also to the potion sequence world building elements, like I mentioned. And so from what I can gather, there are 22 potions, or 22 sequences, and they go from sequence 9 to sequence 1 or 0 if you've read that far. And each one of these sequences gives people different powers. And of course, the higher the sequence you drink, you basically start at sequence 9, and then you need to digest that potion, which means get used to the powers and the side effects and etc. And then eventually you're able to digest it, and you can drink then the sequence 8, and each sequence gives you better powers pretty much. And I think this detail of the world building was the thing that won me over for the web novel, because suddenly I was like, ooh, so what sequences are there? Which one would I choose if I had the choice? And I mean, what powers did they give? So yeah, suddenly I was reading a lot more just to try and find out all these different pieces. So as you can see, there is a progressive interest as I kept reading the book. At the start, it was very rocky, yes, but the more I read, the more interest I was getting, and the momentum started growing. Of course, I think there were ways to change that start. Again, like I said, distilling the information, especially when Klein was talking about food and coins, which at the point that I'm at, they're actually quite important, especially the money, because there are several aspects of different plot lines that involve money, and so he does need to take into account all of that. But I think that information being given so early at the start, it contributes for maybe a few people giving up on the web novel. But I think once Klein gets through those first chapters and gets introduced to the Nighthawks, then things start getting a lot better. I mean, except for the characters again, because we get introduced to a few characters that, again, feel very stereotypical. But again, as you read, they start getting better. And by the end, you definitely see a progress where they are not just two-dimensional. They don't just have specific characteristics that represent a whole section of society, but they become their own people. And if you compare the first 10 chapters with the last 10 chapters of this volume, you will see a big difference, not only in writing itself, but in the way the characters are dealt with. But of course, way before the end of the volume, you will find yourself connected with the characters. I personally noticed with the sequence of Old Neil, and now let me say, I was fully convinced, I was really fully convinced that someone was gonna go mad, but that someone was gonna be Captain Dunn, And it wouldn't happen in volume 1, like it would only happen maybe volume 2, most likely volume 3. So when I was reading and everything seemed to be fine, and suddenly Klein starts realizing that old Neil might be going insane, I was like, uh-oh, this is not good. And then when they go and try to save him only to find out that it's too late, my reaction was like Jennifer Lawrence's,
"What do you mean? What do you mean by shaking it? What are you doing? What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?"
And then we have what I think is the saddest part of this first volume. And hear me well, because I am truly saying that it is a sad part, which I thought we wouldn't get this level of emotion in this web novel, or at least in the first volume. So this tells me that the connection I gained with the characters was quite strong, and I was feeling sad for Klein and for whatever he was feeling. And in regards to the whole volume, I actually felt this part was sadder than the ending when Klein has to abandon his siblings. I mean, it's still a sad part and it is very moving. However, I feel like it wasn't as impactful as Old Neil because it was all so sudden. Now, the other thing I want to talk about before this video becomes too long is the amount of mysteries that exist in this book. I don't think you will ever be bored. Confused? Maybe, but never bored. I mean, we have the Tarot Club plot with all the people that will eventually come up to that club and the Fog Realm. And then we have the suicide plot where Klein just unalived himself and Joe transmigrated into his body, which seems to be somewhat related to this Antigonus book, which in turn is connected to the mountain ranges associated with the book, which in turn seems to be connected with the Fog Realm and the Fog Realm with the Tarot Club. See, like everything seems to be connected while at the same time being its independent plotline. And then of course we have other mysteries like Mr. Azik, or Azik. I really don't know how to say his name, but A-Z-I-K, Azik, either way. I'm gonna say Mr. Like, what is he? My theory, and this goes into the theory regarding potion sequences, which has kind of been mentioned, but I'm not fully convinced yet it has been confirmed at the point where I'm at in volume 2, is that if you drink all the potions of a sequence, so if you go from sequence 9 up to sequence 1 or 0, you actually become the god associated with that potion sequence. So the Nighthawks, for example, if someone reached sequence 1 or 0, they would become the goddess of every night. Now, this theory of mine has some issues because what would happen if multiple people reached that sequence stage? Like, would we have multiple goddesses of every night, or would they battle and fight each other until there's only one? My answer to that is that maybe that is what happens, and that's why the different epochs happen, because there was some battle between gods and eventually they all died until there was one of each of the sequences, or less, but who knows. But going back to Mr. Azik, this all to say that my theory is that he is actually someone who drank up to the sequence 1 or 0 and became dead. So basically he is dead, if that makes any sense. But what happened to him losing his memories, and why does he have to kind of recreate his life over and over again? Again, no idea why that happens. It's another mystery that I still need to read more about to form any theories. And the last thing I want to talk about is about the plot twist at the end with the pregnant girl carrying the spawn of the true god, which is actually an evil god, and it's basically kind of like Satan. I found that the way things that were mentioned a third of the way through this volume suddenly became very relevant for the climax, the ending of the volume, was done really, really well. Especially the way the author used an artifact 0 point something something, I cannot remember the number exactly, that basically whatever you write happens in a way that coincidences happen. Of course, it needs to still be possible enough. I think that was very good. Clap for Cuttlefish That Loves Diving, which is the translated name of the author. And I think that was done quite well, and I'm very keen to know what will happen next regarding the artifact and regarding the people that were involved, like Lavinus and the other person writing with the artifact. I know that for some, reading this, it might read as if the author is just pulling things out of nowhere to try and fill the blanks of the plot, but doing this last minute. But I do think that there is some sort of thinking ahead of what the plot will become, and I think the author really thinks of the story that he wants to tell. Yes, sometimes it does feel a bit too convenient, but I mean, if you're okay with just letting go of that for a bit and keep enjoying the story, I think you'll enjoy it a lot more rather than always nitpicking these details. It really depends on how much you want to invest your sense of disbelief in the story or not. But anyways, I still recommend it. I had a lot of fun, and I mean, I'm reading volume 2 and I think I'm close to chapter 300. No, maybe not, 200 something. Either way, I'm enjoying still, and I'm very keen to finish volume 2, which is still far away, so don't expect anything soon. But I guess that's enough of me rambling about this book. Let me know of your opinions. Comment down below, but be aware, no spoilers, or if you want to say something regarding volume 2, just put a huge warning sign saying spoilers. Anything about volume 1, it's fair game. I mean, this video is a spoilery review of the volume 1, so the comments can also be spoilery, but nothing about volume 2, please, or just clear warning so that I don't get spoiled and the other people don't get spoiled as well. And if you wanted me to talk more about this, let me know. What things did I not cover that you want to see covered? I have a video coming or preparing about potions and the organizations, societies, how these two come together in this world. We'll be focusing on that. But aside from that, what other topics should I discuss here? Let me know, comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and I shall be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon.